Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.
All right, thanks for joining me on this episode of Pod Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dikis. Today, I'm joined by a fourth-year student and now technically doctor, right? Recent graduate,
Yep.
Mohamed AbdelGilil, who is a fourth-year student at Des Moines University, but soon to be resident, counting down the days. Welcome, Mo. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Dikis.
Yeah, so Mo, you rotated with me. You did a month with me. That's how we came to know each other. But I thought you'd have kind of an interesting story to tell people on kind of how you came to podiatry and your backstory. I always found very interesting. So why don't you tell people kind of where you're from and how you ended up kind of where you are in podiatry right now?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I did spend 4 years during middle school, high school in Egypt, actually studied there a little bit and things like that due to personal reasons and family reasons. And then we came back to continue the education here and then attended a local university that's about a 10-minute drive from where we live here in Houston, Texas. And then throughout that entire journey, even just starting from the fifth grade, to be honest, prior to going to Egypt and coming back, the entire mindset was just medicine. It was just something that was ingrained in me. Medicine whole started when during elementary school, actually during a summer school, and we were supposed to do like a project. And out of nowhere, I just started Googling about the heart. You know, normally as kids, we think the heart is like, you know, this shaped, right?
Right.
But it was more than that. Clearly, when I saw the Google picture, we had to do a presentation and everything, and I just got interested in just, you know, cardiothoracic, just, you know, anything. So cardiothoracic surgery, whatever it was. And that was kind of like the long-term goal pretty much. And then come college, rotated with a few different specialties like family medicine, ENT, because you have to spice up the application, of course, and show them that, you know, you're going out there, you're exploring it. But me personally, I wanted to explore and see what it was like, right? I think the only way really to see if something's meant for you or not, if you're able to walk in those shoes, even if it's just for a week. And so did family medicine, ENT, cardio. And then I shadowed a local podiatrist that did mostly like in-clinic work. So she wasn't doing a lot of surgeries. And it was interesting to see that side of podiatry first before going into, you know, the surgeries and everything. And then a family podiatrist, one of my friends that sees my father, he was like, yeah, just come shadow me, see what it's like. And this man was just banging surgery after surgery after surgery. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. Like, I've never felt so confident before in a specialty prior to starting, you know, pod school, med school, whatever it is. And it just like came out to be the way it is. So I shadowed him. I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. It was still application season. So I was still, you know, applying to MDDO schools as well as in podiatry schools. And then got into DMU. And here we are, I guess, 4 years later.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, you know, I always thought it was interesting that your heritage is Egyptian, and then you spent some time back there. So what was that like, kind of transitioning? I know you were younger, but kind of transitioning back and forth. What was that like? Because I assume it's similar, but in a lot of ways quite different.
100%. I think it's a humbling and interesting experience, to say the least. I think ironically, when we arrived to Egypt, it was like June of 2010. And 6 months later, January 25th, a whole coup erupted in Egypt. And it was just the perfect timing to see everything kind of just unfold. And it was just coup after coup after coup until like our last year or so, when everything kind of like started stabilizing in Egypt in particular, because that's when the Arab Spring happened. So it wasn't just Egypt. It was like Egypt, Syria, Libya, and, you know, and a few other countries and stuff where the Arab Spring like had evolved and the protests and everything. And so that was one side of it, of course, which you didn't even expect normally.
Right.
And then, of course, the other side is adapting to like, okay, now you have to like, adapt to the culture, adapt to the language. Granted, we were exposed to some of it already here in Houston from our communities and such, but of course
Hmm.
it's different when it's full scale and everyone around you, is doing this and doing that. I think at the time, it was more of like, oh my God, what are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. Like, you're going from a society that has, for example, like laws and rules and everybody abides by them to something where there's still laws and rules in Egypt and everything, but people don't necessarily, abide by them, right? The
Mm.
concept of traffic is completely different. You got tuk-tuks on the streets and this and that, at least at the time when we lived there. But now
Yeah.
it became like more better from like a developmental standpoint, the regulations and things like that from like, the
Yeah.
current people that are like
Sure.
holding positions and stuff. But, to say the least, it was definitely interesting.
Yeah, I bet. That's just worlds different. Like I grew up,
Yep.
you've lived in Des Moines now for a couple of years, and it's
Yeah,
just,
3 years. Yep.
yeah,
It's
it's pretty
different. It's
like
different.
no coups,
No.
no overthrowing governments,
No,
just
no, no.
pretty easy going, laid back.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's different than Houston for sure, but yeah, exactly.
yeah, well, still no
Oh,
coups in Houston either.
no, no kids in Houston, no.
So what was it about DMU? Because at the time you were looking, so there is now school in Houston, or not Houston, a school in Texas. But what
Right.
kind of prompted you to go to DMU?
Yeah, so I kind of looked at it in different ways. So I'd applied to 6 out of the 9 schools. I was granted interviews at all 6, but only flew out to 3. And this was prior to when COVID became a thing, like in March, and it was, kind of like put out there. So it was prior to that. So we still had interviews in person and such. And so when I was going based off of my analysis, I was kind of like looking at 3 components. The first one would be cost of living in the area. The second was general safety in the area. And then the third was residency placement match rates. And then if you want to add into that, like board pass rates, etc. So that's kind of like the 3 divisions I kind of like split it up into from like a strategical like standpoint to attack it. And then kind of like a fifth one, I guess, would be just the gut feeling. So what I like to do when I'm
Sure.
in a new city, especially because I'm not familiar with the area and I don't know much people or things like that, I like to do one of 2 things. The first thing I used to do was any Uber driver I'd get and I wanted them to take me to a location, I would be like, you know what, here's like $20 or whatever. Show me around the city. Like, I want to get a gut feeling around the city. Like, give me a good ride. Show me, wherever you want to show me. And
Hmm.
it's a good way because they're a local and they know the places, they know the areas and stuff. And then the
Hmm.
other way, what I do now is like, I'll just go to a local mosque in any new city I'm in, link up with some people. They'll welcome me in, this and that. Be like, oh, you should check this out. You should do this. You should do that. So that's kind of
Yeah.
like how that evolved from going from like Uber $20 to relying on like communities to kind of like show you
Sure.
where to go or what to do and stuff. So that's
I think
kind
that,
of the fifth component.
I think that's a great idea because I rely a lot on just Google reviews,
Yeah,
like where do
right,
people go?
right,
But like that's a super good idea to just get in a car with someone, and if they say no, like all right, fine, drop me off. I'll find someone else. But
exactly,
I think most people are, if they're driving for Uber, they tend to know the city, number one.
right,
And number two, I was trying to think if they had pride in their city. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But sometimes I
right,
think they'd be pretty excited. Like, oh, I got to show you this, or oh, you're going to like it over here. Like, I
right.
think they might be into that. So that's a super good idea. Did you do
Yeah,
that
yeah.
when you were out on 4th year and kind of check
So,
things out?
so 4 years since I had to pretty much drive everywhere because I did take my dog with me. So since I had to drive everywhere, not just because of him, but because also you need a car to get to all the
Yeah,
clinics and hospitals and stuff.
right.
It was more of like just relying on like people from like local mosques and stuff that I would go to and attend, and they'd be like,
Yeah,
oh, come and join us for this, or let's go do this, or you should do this, or you should do that. So it was kind of like great from like that standpoint and stuff in terms of
sure.
relying on my in-person Google reviews than like
There you go.
Google reviews in itself.
Yeah, probably more reliable that way, anyways.
Right, exactly, exactly. So that's what I did more so of rather than the whole like Uber thing and stuff.
Sure. So, what cities? You don't have to get into like the pros and cons of any specific program. We don't need to go down that
Yeah.
path. But what cities were you in, or where? Let's back up. How did you pick which programs to kind of go to when you were scouting that out?
Yeah, so a combination of things. Number one, reaching out to upperclassmen that were either on rotations or even were first or second year residents at other programs. I know at DMU, I'm not sure if other schools do this, but at DMU, we have like the roster of where everybody puts where they ended up matching and which programs they rotate to on a month-to-month basis. And so, so that's kind of one way I did it. The other way was relying on kind of like word of mouth of what everyone was talking about, everyone was saying. Faculty, of course, was like another source. So it was a few things like that. And then the reputation of programs that do go around, like, oh my God, a lot of people are going to this program from the upperclassmen, for example. It's like, oh, there must be something there that they're seeing that I may not know about. The other thing too, I didn't really kind of like, make an emphasis with me was going based off of not necessarily location, but like where I think like, the good programs are and where I think, something may potentially work. Like I'm not really tied down to being like in a certain region. I was like, you know what, if I'm going to ever explore, it's probably going to be one of the minimal times I'll have in terms of time, resources, and granted being forced to go to these different rotations. And it would be a way to travel the country and see things I've never seen before too. And so that's kind of how I approach kind of like my fourth year. It's already expensive as it is. Airbnbs are expensive, or room finder, rotating rooms expensive, everything's expensive. So it's like, it's might as well, take the opportunity and make more of it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I've always kind of thought, you're absolutely right that it's expensive, but I've always thought that we podiatry had some amount of benefit in being able to show up to a program and basically evaluate it for a month. Some other programs, MDDO, they might do visits, but to my knowledge, they don't typically do full month rotations, or if they do, they're, more local or not particularly at whatever residency they want to go to. So I've always thought that that was unique for us to be able to kind of get a 1 month experience, for better or for worse. Cause there were certain programs that I showed up to, and a weekend I'm like, no way,
Nope.
Absolutely not. I don't know where I'm going to be, but it won't be here. And then other programs where you show up and you're like, yeah, this is decent. And some programs you're like, yeah, I could definitely see myself here. So
100%.
Was it hard for you to kind of figure out where you wanted to be, or did you just have a good feeling about, a couple and kind of narrowed it down from there?
Basically, that's what it came down to. Is like I didn't really like set my mind in stone. So I started off out at like West Penn, and it set like a really, really good standard for me. When I did start off there as a comparative kind of like tool and stuff, because that's all I know, right? Your first rotation is all you know until you add more rotations and stuff. So I felt like I had a really, really good standard just starting off, and just being able to kind of compare to that, see what I liked, what I didn't like, and kind of go from there. Eventually, towards the end, it narrowed down like to 3 or 4 that I like, okay, I could see myself, 100% going there and I'll be fine. And it was more of like, of course, like seeing like, where you stand, reaching out to the residents, this and that, kind of like getting an idea of where, they think you stand or how well you are. Cause they of course see the other side of things of all the other students that are coming in and stuff. And of course, most people would give like the standard answer, like, yeah, you have like a really good chance, or you have a really good shot. And it just kind of like comes down to like, okay, like, what can I do, of course, to avoid to like, God forbid scramble. But even if you did scramble, like it's still, God has intended it to go that way. So I don't see it as a loss in my personal eyes. It's more of like a gainer, if anything. So it usually just came down to like 3 or 4 and just kind of like went from there, to be honest.
Yeah, it's tough because that's a big decision. You're making a decision for the next few years of your life, and that plays a big role in your career and your training and all that stuff. So sometimes you have a clear cut option, and there are people out there who really, really want to go to program A, but they don't match with program A for whatever reason. So that's the game that you play, right? Of like, I like you, do you like me? Right? Feels like middle school all over again.
Exactly.
Do I have to do this?
I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that. It's one of those things like, we just say it how it is. Like, I'm a grown adult. Just tell me, like, do it, yes or no. It's really that, simple.
Right.
But at the same time, even programs too, until the last second, they're still trying to figure out who they want to take. Because some programs have it structured up differently. Some will have the residents have a significant percentage of contribution versus, or other programs will have like, oh, it's just the director that gets to choose, or it's just, the attendings at the program that get to choose. So it's variable from program to program for sure.
And they also don't want to burn any bridges. So they don't want to tell you, we're not going to rank you, because what if they don't hit their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? We want to keep you in the back pocket. So we want to say, oh yeah, you've got a good chance. So it's just a big game. It's just, I remember it.
It's not fun.
Yeah, it's hard. So, you finished 4th year now. What do you think was the hardest part of 4th year? It could be the travel, could be them being in unfamiliar hospitals, getting badges at every new place, meeting people. Like, what do you think is the hardest thing?
Man, that's a really good question. I honestly don't know. I personally so I guess one of the hardest things, this was only like really with like one program, was, so like I'm very like faith based personally, right? Like I like to go to attend to the mosques if I can for certain prayers every day or at least once a week and stuff. And so it was hard for me, for example, to go to the mosque when I was like on that rotation. I'd still be able to attend my weekly Friday prayers and stuff, but from some of my daily prayers, it was kind of like tough. It's not a requirement in Islam, but it's like, highly recommended, or if you can, you should type of thing. And
Sure.
so besides that being the hardest part, I honestly enjoyed every part of it. The traveling, I feel like at a certain point with rotations, like month 4, month 5, you're like, you know what, just end this. Like, I'm so done, moving, from
Yeah.
state to state or city to city or program to program. Yeah. Cause usually like you go to a program, the first week, you're just kind of like getting your feet wet. You're trying to understand what the flow looks like, how everything is. The second week, you're gaining some confidence. The third week, you're like, okay, I got this. Fourth week, you're like, all right, I got to pack and go. Time to do this all over again. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like, a hard part for sure. But I still found it like fun. Like I'm just going to a new city, meeting new people, new personalities. And it was never honestly like really a dull moment or anything like that.
Yeah, I think the experience can be what you make it. Even if the program
Yes.
isn't necessarily your favorite, your
Yes.
outlook plays a big role into that, and kind of maybe going and enjoying the city or meeting some other
100%.
people, or, the experience doesn't have, even there were programs I was like, I don't like this program, but I'm going to go check out this ice cream shop, and I've heard that this food is good. I'm going to go check that out. You can still have a good time and enjoy your time there and not be miserable the whole time.
Exactly. I think that's a great philosophy to have, just like in anything in life, is just, even if, the experience in itself may not be as fun or daunting, or, even putting you in a depressive state or whatever the case is, I feel like you could still make the most of it and still have fun by trying to compartmentalize and put that aside, but dissociate, like, oh, this is a horrible city, everything based off of just the program. I mean, if the program's horrible, put that to the side, but don't, mix it with the city and, what the city has to offer, what you could explore or gain or adventure on and stuff.
Might as well have fun. Might as well explore.
Exactly.
Might as well
right.
Make the
YOLO.
best of it. Yeah, there you go. So you mentioned your faith there. And so I know this from when you rotated through with me, and I tried to accommodate whatever we needed to accommodate. Because we've talked about you and I have talked about this in at length previously. But were there any issues? Like you mentioned that issue. Were there any issues out on 4th year other than that, or people kind of let you roll with it and do what you need?
Yeah, for the most part, everybody was really accommodative and kind about it, right? The issue is, of course, coming from my standpoint, because I know a lot of people probably have abused the system before, the trust and honesty and such, right? So it's from my endpoint, the way I kind of presented it, to be honest, since I do have prayers throughout the day that are mandatory and I do have to pray, was I either talked to one of the 3rd-year residents or whatever resident I'm with, sometimes even the attending as well. Like I really didn't fear, doing that, because at the end of the day, I want to end up at a program that's going to allow me to do that. I don't want to have like, 2 personalities, one being like, oh, I'm shy or afraid to show who I am. But then when it comes, they're like, oh, what happened here? But at the same time, like I understand like attendings or residents thinking like, oh, they're just trying to get out of this case, or they're just trying to get out of this clinic, for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or they're just trying to do this or they're trying to do that. And of course, like that aspect from my endpoint was there. And so the way I compensated, the way I presented it was like, hey, listen, I have like X amount of prayers I need to be praying at certain times. They're about like 10 minutes each and stuff. I'd be more than happy to make it up, during a weekends, or being extra call, or coming in earlier to make it up, or staying later. Like I'm genuinely willing to do all that stuff in order for me to, meet my personal religious needs and stuff. For the most part, everybody was nice about it. And they're like, yeah, absolutely, go do what you need to do and this and that. The harder one was actually the Friday prayers, because those are usually like an hour. And that's usually either during lunchtime or the hour after lunchtime. So that was a little bit, of course, challenging with some programs. Now, my faith does accommodate. Like, for example, if I'm on call, if it's a call week, I'm not going to be like, oh, sorry, I can't be on call on Friday. Because during residency, I have to be on call. And so, like, it is accommodative when it comes to things like that. But if it's like, for example, like clinic or, this or that, then, there's kind of like not really a very legitimate excuse to be like, oh, skip out on your prayers and stuff. And so for the majority, that was fine. I had some programs tell me like, sorry, you really don't have like a meditation room or a prayer space, like usually like at or some of the ortho groups and things like that, or multi-specialty clinics. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's completely fine. I'll just go out in the parking lot, have a little mat, just throw it on the grass or throw it on the concrete in the parking lot, and I'll just do my prayers like out there and stuff. So I personally, didn't have that get in the way of like, oh, they're maybe being discouraging or they didn't offer their office up or something like that. Like, all right, I'll figure it out. If there's a will, there's a way, as they say.
Yeah, I think that's great to
Yeah.
hear, because you wonder about stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's people of all faiths in every profession, and so we want to be accommodative for everyone and whatever they may
Right.
be, especially people who are maybe different than what you are. I think that's
Exactly.
what makes humans great, is just kind of understanding what other people are into and kind of making that work for them. So that's good to hear, because you might worry
100%.
about
Yeah.
that a little bit of like, okay, is this
Right.
program going to be difficult or not? So
Exactly.
I'm happy
Right.
to hear that. That's good. So
Yeah.
you had advocated for some changes or modifications due to religious beliefs at DMU. Can you talk through that and what that entailed?
Yeah, so I remember I was elected to sit on a committee by some faculty members and stuff. It was like the Faculty Diversity FDDCS or something like that. It was like the Faculty Diversity Committee, basically. And
Okay.
it was like a few different faculty members. It was myself and two other students from like different programs and stuff as well at DMU. And we were sitting there and talking about like different things and stuff. And the kind of conversation came up. I'm like, so out of curiosity, if people have like, religious events that aren't like, for example, federally, recognized or don't fall on a Saturday or a Sunday, how do we go about that? Because I just thought about it. I'm like, do I really have to go to every single professor, and explain, every single time why I need this religious accommodation, et cetera? And so the conversation came out of like, well, why don't we just standardize it and just have kind of like a form where students can pretty much, fill out online at the beginning of every semester, basically submit it to like the course coordinator, the course director, and it's just kind of like one and done. It's recorded in the system. DMU has it. DMU is aware of it. The school's aware of it. Faculty's aware of it. And so I think it was a nice way to streamline it. And so that way now, if you needed a religious accommodation or whatever, you put it in the form. Everybody's kind of on the same page from a communication standpoint, and then it kind of gets accommodated to every student's like needs and things like that. So I think that was like an amazing thing that we managed to all kind of get together and put together. And I forgot who it was, but it was one of like the higher administrators that kind of like got on that and pretty much got it running within a week. And then we implemented it that following fall.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So just streamlining the process, make it easier for people that come after you too. So
exactly, that's the whole point, is like if you hold a position or if you hold a title, is the goal is to make it better than what you once took, and leave it in a better state when you leave it and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you were class president, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Something like that. That's what they say.
Is that like most popular, or how do you win that?
I don't know.
I'm joking. So what were your duties for class president? What were you kind of what roles did you serve in that position?
Yeah, it was, primarily, of course, just making sure like the class is heard and everything, even if it goes against, the agenda that you have in mind or what the overwhelming majority wants, like making sure everybody's really like represented and presenting both cases. It was more so like a direct relationship with Dean Smith, like Dean Smith, like, I'm thinking X, Y, and Z is happening. What can we do about it? And it was one of those things. It was like, yeah, sure. We did have like, meetings with Dean Smith and stuff where anybody can say pretty much whatever they're kind of like feeling or any suggestions or any recommendations. And from that, actually, from these meetings came a lot of great things. In terms of like really in my role, I just saw it as like, I'm just like another student, just like my other peers and everything like that. And if there's anything that I sense, for example, be it from our group chats that, no faculty are involved in, or if people come to me on a personal level or have questions or whatever the case is, or things can be done better in a different way, it was kind of like more so kind of like a relay thing, in addition to kind of like just I like to start different like things in different projects. So we started kind of like an anonymous Q&A Google form, right? Or just kind of like anything you feel like, isn't being addressed or you're afraid to speak or whatever the case is, submit it on this Google form. We'll take a look at it and address it that way. So different things like that I kind of like mainstream. But besides that, really, it was more so just me, just another position to just serve others and to kind of like give back and stuff. Something I personally enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. That's great.
Yeah.
Kind of back to fourth year a little bit. So was there anything that you weren't prepared for? It's, you came on my rotation and that's really nothing like fourth year other than clinic, surgery, getting your
Mm-hmm.
feet wet a little bit, doing some things, seeing some interesting things, kind of broadening your horizons. But was there anything that kind of surprised you about fourth year or anything that you weren't kind of ready for?
I think one thing that kind of like surprised me a little bit was, the amount of like information, of course, especially like during our third year and fourth year, and even like the later of the second year, like second semester, when we get into like all the clin pod surgeries and this and that. It was interesting to see like all these surgeries and techniques and things that we learned that aren't being practiced today. Like, for example, like a Riverdine, for example, I've not seen a single one like from start of
Right.
fourth year all the way to end of fourth year. So it's interesting from, we get tested on the historical
Nor
things on that standpoint.
Nor should you, by the way. Nor should you see one of those. There are some things that are dead and buried for a reason. So
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing that I saw. I'm like, so we learned all this stuff, we memorized all this stuff, we get tested on all this stuff, but only half of it is what's being practiced today, which was interesting to me. I understand the historical context and the reasoning, the theories and everything like that, but I think emphasis should perhaps be put more onto the things that are actually being done out there. And things like that, like your typical first MPJ or like first TMTJ or Lapidus, whatever it is. So I thought that was really interesting, from a educational standpoint. Here's all the knowledge versus like, oh, here's what we're doing. Besides that, honestly, I think at least for DMU personally, I felt like very, very well prepared out on my rotations, especially amongst like my co-externs and such. I think like the kind of like drive of like the DMU way of like, your third year, you're already hammering in like Crozier and Prism and Watkins, and like you at least go through them 3 times before you finish your third year, and then you're already out being pimped. And I got pimped so many times across different programs. And the funny thing is, the program that I got pimped the most at is the program that I'm going to, the VA in New Mexico. We're talking like 15, 20 questions a day, and this is by the residents. And this was honestly more of like for fun, like to see what you know versus what you don't know. And they were kind of like more so looking out for us, preparing us for interviews and stuff. And I was like, this was only like my third rotation out. And I'm like, oh my God, all these pimp questions. Like, I feel like maybe I'm getting like 75, 80% right. There are things that I still need to fresh up on, need to look up and stuff like that. But I honestly found it very, very beneficial, as much as it was perhaps maybe intimidating at first. You're like, oh my God, if I get these questions wrong, do I even have a shot at this program? They're going to think I'm, stupid. I don't deserve to be here and this and that. But it was more of like, I'm just telling you this so you just know it, really, not rather than like, oh, this is going to be held against you and stuff. Besides that honestly was about it, to be honest. Everything else was kind of just like, get your feet wet and get thrown in there and just being proactive and active about, assisting the nurses. I think nurses are kind of like, perhaps maybe like undermined in the sense where when you're on rotations and stuff, you're like, oh, you think you're the hot shot, you're the student, you're the resident, you're the student, you can do this, you can do that. But I found it very, very beneficial to befriend nurses, to befriend the surgical staff, the surgical techs, anesthesia, joke around with them, have fun with them within, of course, within like, limits and, things like that. But besides that, I think I think those are the two really things that kind of caught me off guard between third year to fourth year.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there about pimping and basically nonstop question asking. So I think there's a right way and a wrong way that people can pimp. And the right way to me is teaching. I'll ask you a question. If you get it right, we can discuss more in depth, because now I know that you understand that concept. We can go to level 2, level 3, level 4. If you don't understand it, we're going to back up a minute and explain what's going on here. And there are certain people who pimp in a way that is productive and furthers your knowledge. And there's some that just use it as a I'm here and you're below me type of thing. And I'm establishing this hierarchy of, what do you mean you don't know Austin's first name is Dale, right? Like, wait, how is that useful to me at all? Why do I need to know that? I don't, but yet my brain knows that, and now it pushed out something that I probably should know, because now someone's hammered that into my head. So there's useful knowledge and there's a lot of not useful knowledge. So
I find the not useful knowledge more like challenging and like fun from that standpoint. Like, I personally don't take it seriously. I remember one of the third year residents I was really good with at a different program. We were like hitting it and stuff, and he started just pimping me like, what does ACE stand for? what does, this stand for? I'm like, what does ABD stand for? I'm like, it's a good quick
Yeah.
curiosity question, like a trivia game. But like,
Right.
what benefit does it add, to like, the general patient care aspect of it? Probably
Yeah.
nothing.
It doesn't. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
there's
if you
that.
like trivia, then there's always that.
Right,
But
right.
you just have to make sure you don't turn around and you ask all those questions to a fourth year coming
Eh,
in next
Yeah,
year.
I'll try not to. No promises. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so let's talk a little bit about your program. So you're going to be going to New Mexico.
Mhm.
Why don't you kind of talk up your program a little bit? What was it about that program that you really are looking forward to?
Yeah. So the first thing is the VA New Mexico, VA Albuquerque, Raymond G. Murphy Center. It's the busiest VA in the entire country. And so that's a plus right there. When I was there, we easily got 2 ankle fractures within 2 weeks at the VA. And I thought that was pretty cool too. I got to scrub in actually on both of those two cases because one week, I think one week I was the student who was assigned to like surgeries that week, and then the other week was like being on call and stuff. And so I thought that was kind of like pretty cool to see that from that standpoint. The other thing, the amount of clinic they do. I think one thing I kind of realized across rotations, and this was like a decision when I made at the end of the day to decide where I want to go, was the fact that, yeah, surgery is fun and everything like that. But from talking to different, attendings and everything like that, with all due respect, that's not where the income is, right? It's pretty much where clinic is, the amount of patients you see, etc. But at the same time, you also need that clinic base in order for you, for example, to potentially do surgery on surgical candidate patients and such. And so that's kind of one thing that kind of like opened my mind. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, they do very, very well in terms of like clinic percentage wise versus surgery. They do get a good mix of both. But with clinics, it's very kind of like set in stone, like Monday through Friday, your typical like 8 to 3 or 8 to 3:30 or whatever. And certain residents are covering certain clinics and stuff. So that's also a benefit that I kind of found there. The other benefit too was that they have their own separate nail clinic by nail techs. I believe they're either MAs or nurses. I'm not sure, to be honest. And they kind of like handle the nail care of things while we stick to everything else, basically wound care, your casual acute stuff, chronic stuff, you name it. They also do have like I believe a procedure day either once a month or once a week, if I'm not mistaken, depending on the attending, where you do like in office procedures and things like that too, which was pretty cool. What I really really loved was the residents. It was like an amazing, nice environment to be in. No toxic stuff. Everybody was literally there just to cheer everyone on, from at least from the perspective that I saw. And I felt like very welcomed, and everybody was just so down to earth and kind and everything. I remember the first week I was there, I was the only student that was there because there was like a miscommunication email that got sent out. My other co-externs came the following week, but even during my first week, after 2 days or 3 days, I was rotating in July, funny enough, and it was July 4th. And Dr. Mali, the program director, was like, "Hey, I'm having a July 4th, little gathering at my house. Why don't you come through?" I was like, "Oh, I'd love to." And I had a great time just bonding with everyone there and all the attendings and stuff. And so I just felt like it was like, um, the academic side of things, they're very nice on and heavy on, and that's something I really like, because kind of like you mentioned, it's one of those things I just don't like to memorize something and not understand why it is, which was pretty much like a good chunk of pod school or any medical school or DO school. It's that same concept. You memorize all this stuff and then you go into action like, wait, why is it that way? And you just kind of start developing that critical thinking and wanting to know why and how it works. So they're really great with their academics. Like I said, the pimping was amazing. I felt like it prepared me very well moving forward, and it solidified all the information that I had to review third year. So it was kind of like Anki, like in person, or like a flashcard system in person, basically.
Yeah, sure.
So it was like all in all like a 10 out of 10 with my 1 month there and stuff. I thought it was really nice. They prepared us for, in July, they were preparing us already for interview cases. They had like a mock interview set up for us, like as we exited and stuff. So that was really the only program that did something like that from a mock interview standpoint. It was like all the faculty, all the residents in kind of one room. You're the only student in front of a screen and you're walking through the case. Nothing's held against you. It's more of like, let's see, what you learned, what where you're at with your knowledge base and stuff. So I really, really found it to be like it was a really fun time in New Mexico.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we did that at my residency at UPMC, and I went to residency with Dr. Sarah Mali, who is
Oh,
one
that's
of
awesome.
your attendings. So I think she took that from UPMC and enacted it there. So that mock interview at the end of the month is really cool.
Yeah.
Gives you
Yes.
kind of an experience of what the interview process is going to be like. So it's not so
Right.
intimidating when you get there. You're like, oh, I already know what it's like. That doesn't mean you're going to get them all
Hmm.
right, but at least you're not
Yep.
as intimidated. So yeah, she's one of my
Exactly.
favorite people. She was such a fun co-resident. So that's awesome that you get
Yeah.
to spend time with her and Terry down there. So I'm
Yeah.
jealous
Yeah.
for you to go down there, and I'm not jealous for you in like July and August. And
No, no, no.
my wife's grandparents live in Albuquerque, so
Oh, nice.
yeah, I know it gets super hot down there.
Hot, yeah. Well,
But
listen,
you're from
Houston's
Houston, so
Houston, exactly. It's hot and humid here. There, it's just hot, basically.
we're talking a guy who's Houston and Egypt. Those
Egypt.
are his baselines of like how
The
hot it is. You're
hybrid.
like, New Mexico, I can handle that.
Yeah,
I'm from way
forget
up
it.
north in Iowa. I'm like, woo, it's hot.
You know, right?
Too hot for me. I burn. So I bet you're excited to kind of get there and get going. And you said you're going to be packing up and moving here pretty
Yep.
soon. So how
Yep.
does that,
Yep.
do you know how the first do you know what rotation you're going to be on, or how that starts when you get going, or what's it going to be like when you
Yeah.
get there?
Yeah, I think it's a nice schedule. So of course, every resident has kind of like a different schedule because they're usually two first years on podiatry like every month, but they alternate. So the way my schedule is set up personally is I start off with podiatry and then I do like internal medicine and then podiatry again and then off service and then podiatry. So it alternates really well from that standpoint, which I think is
Sure.
really solid. The call schedule, so we take 1 week call every time we're on podiatry, we get 1 week call. In addition to that, we also get 1 week of surgery every time we're on podiatry. We're like the VA surgeon that's assigned to the cases that week. And then the other is we also have 1 week of press call. Basically, all the community attendings will have any cases that get added. Anytime you're on podiatry, you basically get 1 week of being on call. Any cases that come in, they're basically yours. You also get a week of just surgery and then a week of that press call that I mentioned every time they're on podiatry. So that's kind of like how that call schedule is set up. They do 2 academic sessions a month of like McGlamory chapter reviews orchestrated by the first years. And in addition to that, they also do every month kind of like a skills lab. Like I remember when I was there, the skills lab that they did was teaching us like sterile technique and stuff, but also going over surgical instruments. So it was basically residents and attendings holding up instruments and saying, what is this? What is that? From that standpoint. So that's kind of like how that was kind of like set up over there.
It sounds fun. I remember my days of residency, and it's just, it's a lot because you don't know what to expect. But then looking back on it, I always said if I could go back and do school all over again, I don't know if I would. Like that was hard. That was grueling. That was, tough. Worth it, but tough.
Yep.
But if someone said, hey, you can go back and do residency again, I'd be like, when? Can I go now? Like that, it was awesome. Like the camaraderie, the co-residence, the experience, everything about it is just so fun. So I'm excited for you to get there and get started and hang out with my buddy Sarah and get your feet wet and start learning what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. So I think you brought up a good point a little bit ago about programs being heavily surgical versus clinic based. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in surgery that you lose sight of what you're going to be doing the majority of the time. Unless you're a trauma surgeon, those are really the only rotations that I went on. Trauma surgeons are handling all the traumas that come in, and then they have like 1 day of clinic or 2 half days of clinic or something. But otherwise, most physicians are going to be clinic based and do surgeries as needed. So getting that clinical experience is very important because you need to be able to work up the patient, figure out what the problem is. Procedure selection is very important. Some of these surgical programs, you show up to surgery and they're saying, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do an Evans, we're going to do a Cotton, we're going to do X, Y, Z, we're going to do a gastroc. And you didn't get that decision-making experience. So I think it's easy to gloss over the clinic part of that and just jump to the surgery because there's technical details of surgery. but you need to know procedure selection and figure out how to pick which procedure you're going to be doing. So I think you brought up a good point there. It doesn't really apply to you. I'm just mentioning it because I think
Yeah.
that's an important thing that people sometimes neglect when they're looking at residency programs. Oh, they do a ton of surgery. Great. That's needed. You need to know how to do surgery.
Yes.
But if you do all surgery and you don't know how to do clinic, that's difficult. You can do surgical
Yep.
labs later. You can do a fellowship year. There's lots of opportunities to get more and more surgery. There aren't that many opportunities to go back and learn how to be a clinician. And that's really
Yes.
the majority of what we do. So I think that's an important point that you made there.
And I think it's interesting because it kind of corresponds. I saw the poll you posted a couple of days ago regarding like, is it podiatry or is it foot and ankle surgery, or like, what do you tend to kind of use a lot and stuff? And I think it's because, of course, it's like, kind of sold like you're a foot and ankle surgeon. It's always like, embedded in your head as a student and stuff from faculty and this and that, which sure, like, there is merit and truth to it. Absolutely. But at the same time, like you said, you start to lose sight, like you mentioned, of like, oh, okay, yeah. So I have the expectation now that I'm going to be doing just surgery every single day, and I'm going to be like at the level of a trauma surgeon or a general surgeon and be able to do these cases and such. When realistically, you're like, no, like most of your time really should be spent in clinic, and you just kind of like scale up from there to see, which patients are truly surgical candidates versus which can I just do surgery on. And I think that's where that distinguishing factor is. Like even like seeing, like you mentioned, like flat foot recons and stuff, it's one of those things. It's like when you follow up with some of these patients, they're like, I'm still in pain, or I have nerve entrapment, or I feel numb here and this and that. It's like one of those things. It's like you shouldn't, and I'm a firm believer in this, you should not do surgery unless like, it's like, that's it. That's the only option available. You've exhausted everything else. Besides that, try to stay away from doing surgery in itself. That's my philosophy personally.
No, and I agree with you, especially so you and I have very different perspectives looking at the same thing. You're a fourth year student. You've had 0 days of residency and 0 days of being an attending. I've had all of residency and now in a few weeks, 9 years of being an attending. And I think the exact same thing. I talk people out of surgery every single day. I tell people, you need to come beg me for surgery, because if it doesn't go perfect, this was your idea. You wanted this. I didn't talk you into surgery. I have patients all the time who come in and say, look at my toe. I didn't even really want surgery. He said I needed surgery. I'm like, this is not good. Like how, this is a mess. So I agree with you. I tell people the surgery is the end of the road. We've exhausted all other options and opportunities, and we'll go to surgery if we need to. Now, trauma out the window. Some people need
absolutely.
surgery. Some people have infection. We're going to put infection and trauma. We're going to put that aside. We're talking purely elective surgery. So, yeah, I think you and I, interestingly, are on opposite ends of the spectrum. But think about that the same way. So,
right.
So back to fourth year for a minute, because that's where you are. Is there anything you would have done differently looking back on it? So picture that you are talking to yourself going into day one of podiatry school. What would you tell yourself 4 years ago? Easy things like, hey, it's going to be okay. You graduate, you make it through. Everything's going to be all right. That's an easy thing to say. But is there anything you would have done differently? Would you have studied differently? Would you have done anything different?
I don't know. And the reason I say I don't know is because like all these like events, even from day one until like, finishing and graduating, I feel like it was more of like, if it weren't for these subsequent events that did happen throughout those 4 years, then I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. So it's one of those things. It's hard to think like, yeah, if I did hypothetically do things differently, then what outcome would have been produced, or how would have it changed, the outcome that, where I'm at right now. And it's very hard to say. Like I had like ups and downs throughout these last 4 years, but like all in all, like would I do it again? I felt like I've learned so much about myself personally. I felt like I had a lot of spiritual growth that happened, a lot of personal growth. It was a mix of culmination of different things that I just saw kind of like, try to find the positive and optimistic things that happen and kind of really just hyper focus on those. Because then we wouldn't have optimistic and positive things if it weren't for us not having negative things and bad things that happen in our lives and stuff. Like, yeah, throughout the 4 years, I could talk about all the bad things that happened. Yeah, my car got wrecked, for example, while I was helping someone that was in need, right? it was a funny story for another time. So there was that, right? Or even just like, COVID and starting, like you're always thinking like, oh, I'm going to start my first year. I'm going to be able to see everyone, meet everyone, kind of like how they show in the movies and the shows and stuff. And then like, you're like, oh, there's COVID. Like we can't even like, be
Yeah.
within X amount of distance with each other. We have to put masks on and this and that. So it's definitely like so many challenging things that happened throughout those 4 years, or even doing OSCEs on mannequins. It was hilarious.
Oh.
I remember I was doing an OSCE on a mannequin. It was like the abdominal exam during first year. And like I was tilting this is like a mannequin without a head. So it's basically a body. If I recall correctly, I'm just tilting the body forward. The body cavity almost opens up. The organs just almost fall out. so like I think like we've been really through it these last 4 years. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if it weren't for everything the way it happened, then I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. So if anything, I'm grateful, and I can't really imagine things going, differently, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a great outlook. I think that's a good way to handle things. So before we finish up, I got to hear the car story. So what happened? What happened to your
Oh
car?
boy. Yeah, so I was driving by myself. I forgot where in Des Moines. I was doing some shopping and stuff. So then I parked my car to the side because as I was driving, I literally see an accident unfold in front of me. And as the accident unfolds, I see this was like straight out of an action movie. The car kind of one car kind of like comes in the opposite lane where I'm going, blocks off basically the lane that I'm in. Doesn't hit me or anything, thankfully. Like I managed to stop prior to it. But I see the driver literally open the car door and just start limping on one foot, running to the gas station, calling his friend, telling him, "Hey, come pick me up." Like I'm not even exaggerating. That's literally what happened. I'm like, there's no way this is happening right now. But my
What
main concern was that, yeah, go ahead.
what part of town are you in? I've lived in Des Moines almost my whole life. I've never seen these
I
shenanigans.
don't even remember. I promise you this. I forgot where it was. I forgot where it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
But and this was during first year too. So like I lived like close by. I was like a 10-minute drive from campus. I was in Windsor Heights area.
Okay.
And so my concern was there was an old lady that was in a kind of like older truck, and we were on a flat kind of like bridge. And her tail of the truck got stuck to the end of the bridge. Her entire car was still on the road and everything. I just wanted to make sure she was all right. So it was snowing too, mind you. I put my flashing hazard lights and everything, and it's slowly just directing everyone to just kind of like bypass my car and stuff. Because my thing is like this: if people are driving not paying attention, they see this car that's literally just crashed here, it's just gonna be a chain reaction. So that was my fear primarily. I didn't even think about my car. So I go render aid to her, make sure she's all right, call 911 and stuff. And then like someone else does the exact same thing behind her car. He parks his car right behind her truck, so nobody hits her as well, and people can bypass him. So we're standing on the side of the road, just waiting for the ambulance and the cops to show up, basically. And then out of nowhere, we're looking at my car. It was a '98 Camry, and so we were sitting on the side of the road, standing on the side of the road. I was like, we're talking about cars. I don't know why. We're just talking about cars, and we all looked to my car, and I'm like, yeah, man, this thing's a beauty. It's an amazing car. Look back. I swear to God, look away. I hear boom. I look back and I just start laughing. I'm like, there's no way this just happened. Ironically enough, it was like a 17-year-old kid that was on his phone, right? I think he had Snapchat open or something. So he ends up, of course, completely totaling my car. And now I'm like, oh, shoot, now I got to go see if this guy's all right, right? So I'm like, hey, is everything going? He's like, I can't move my neck. I'm like, oh, okay, well, just stay still. Let's wait for the ambulance to arrive. The funny thing is, we were kind of like in the middle of two different zones, right? PD zones. So the first crew of cops that came, they're like, what's going on? They're so confused because now you have two accidents happening in the same area in different district zones.
Yeah.
So like, here, this is what happened. They were, of course, when they came, they were mainly focused on trying to find this guy that ran on foot and just left his car, right? So they went to try to check him out. Then the other crew of cops came and stuff. So we called the ambulance. The ambulance came for the kid. The lady was all right. And so with the kid, ironically enough, his dad ended up coming. Apparently, his dad was a paramedic or an EMT, but he wasn't working that shift. But it was for the same ambulance crew. So they called him, he came and stuff. And now I'm just like in the middle of the road. I'm like, well, I don't know how I'm going to get home. The cops were like, we'll give you a ride home. Just let us finish all this paperwork. I'm like, all right.
Oh, my
but
God.
The kid's dad eventually was like, hey, let me just drive you home and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I appreciate it. They dropped me off home. Now, there are two great things that happened. The one thing was like, of course, like now we're in COVID. There's a chip shortage when it comes to cars. New cars are already expensive as it is. I don't have the funds to get a new car. older cars are, used cars, of course, now prices are through the roof. So you're like, okay, what can $2,000 from my 98 Camry value get me in 2020 during
Yeah.
COVID? Nothing, basically.
Not much.
Yeah, nothing. So then one of my friends, one of my DO friends, Victor, he ends up essentially setting up a GoFundMe. And then everybody from all over Friends School, Houston, everywhere just started contributing to this fund. And then after 3 months of like just constantly searching for cars and relying on my roommate Calvin to take me to school and stuff, eventually I found like a RAV4 or whatever, and things just kind of like, you know, worked miraculously that way. So the summary of the story is basically like, any good you do in this life towards anyone, if you do it for the right cause and right intention, it's always going to find its source back to you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that is an interesting story. So
it is very interesting. Out of all places, it was Iowa.
Yeah. Well, you'd think we know how to drive in the snow around here. We get enough snow, but
nope,
apparently not.
Nope.
Apparently not.
We're not gonna get into the driving debate in Iowa, right?
All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today. I think this will be really helpful for kind of younger students and people that are kind of going through your similar situation, whether they're listening to it now or listening to it 5 years from now, and people that are in middle school right now and they never even heard of podiatry school. So I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us and giving us your insight to what it's like. I thought you had an interesting story. Obviously you do, with your background and your heritage and all that stuff, and what you've done to kind of help, you know, leave a little bit of a lasting legacy behind and helping other people. I think that's awesome. So thanks for joining me today.
For having me. No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you. Thank you for everything you do.
Yep. All right. Good to see you, bud.
You as well. Thank you.